What happens when you put The Legend of Parsifal, Mulan, Morrigan from Dragon Age, some diversity, and put it in a blender on high speed? You get Spear by Nicola Griffith. I don't usually read Arthurian fantasy, let alone queer Arthurian fantasy, but Spear was a home run for me, and I'm happy to talk about it. Every so often, I like to dive into a book blind, and when the Amazon algorithm recommended Spear to me, I noticed three things right off the bat. A 4.5 average rating, less than 1,000 reviews on Amazon, and several high-quality award nominations. And I know BookTube generally does not count about award nominations, but clearly the evidence was pointing to Spear being a hidden gem in the historical fantasy subgenre, and I picked it up without reading anything else about the book. And I was surprised to have a very intriguing, compelling Arthurian fantasy read that had me completely immersed and knocked my socks off. Parsifal and his quest for the Holy Grail has been redone throughout the centuries over and over again. So what makes this adaptation different than all the others? In this adaptation, Parsifal is a woman, and not just any woman. A woman raised in the wilderness in isolation away from civilization, whose only company was her magical, witchy mother. Destiny calls, and our young hero leaves on a quest to join the court of a faraway up-and-coming king of high renown. It's King Arthur. One trend that I like going on in the Arthurian retelling subgenre of fantasy that I think is picking up speed that I find to be very compelling is that most adaptations that are being made in the present day aren't told from the point of view of King Arthur himself. They're told from a point of view of someone else in the Arthurian mythos, and I think that makes for a way more compelling story. Because our hero was raised in the wilderness, right away our protagonist is made aware that women and men are treated very differently in medieval Europe, and goes through the trouble of hiding their identity by pretending to be a knight, a male knight. So you have the Mulan trope in this book as well. Whenever the Mulan trope is used in a story, that is a warning sign that there's going to be other feminist themes in the story. So if that's not your cup of tea, this book is not for you. In fact, this is an Arthurian retelling with a lot of diverse characters and alternate lifestyles that are portrayed. So if you don't like that, don't pick it up and don't leave some one-star reviews about how the author is political, because I never think the author crossed the line into making this story a politicized read. There are diverse characters, but they're just there. They're not making political statements, and I think that's how it should be done in a historical fantasy context. Right away, from the first page, I was impressed by the author's prose in this book. The writing was lyrical, beautiful, and immersive. You can almost picture the author telling this story over a campfire or to a child as a bedtime story. It was flowy, and the prose never seemed clunky, just such a natural feel as you're reading this book. The writing was so good that I didn't mind the slow pacing of this book, because even though I was taking the scenic route in this narrative, it was cozy and I was comfortable and I was enjoying the show. The pacing was slow, the author takes her time, but when you reach the climax and fall in action, that was pulled off masterfully. If I was to fixate on one negative about this book, I would say the characterization, the character work was a bit lacking. I never felt like I fell in love with any of these characters. I never built a relationship with these characters. Even though a lot happens and it's a good coming-of-age story, I felt like the main protagonist, really, I did not know her. She was still mostly a stranger to me by the end of the narrative. And that's a shame, because even though the pacing of this book was quite slow, I think it would have benefited from having 100 more pages. I don't think the plot would have gotten any slower if we just had some more scenes where I got to know our characters a little bit better. I think a lot of the emotional highs and lows would have hit harder if I had more empathy for the characters in the book. There are two little bonus positives about this book that I loved that other people might not care about. The first one, I love that our protagonist's weapon of choice is a spear. Spears are severely underutilized and underrepresented in fantasy. And that's a damn shame, because if you're aware of the history of warfare, spears were way more common and way more lethal by the numbers than any other hand-to-hand weapon ever. Not axes, not swords, not warhammers, which are all very heavily represented in fantasy. It was a spear. Pikemen and spearmen killed more people in war until we got to guns, basically. So I really love that our main character uses a spear. Very realistic. The second thing that's kind of tied to the first thing, the author did her research. Nicola Griffith generally writes historical fantasy, so she's used to doing a lot of research, and this book had footnotes. I love footnotes. Footnotes are sexy. I say it all the time. I love when the author kind of cites their sources and helps the reader understand more about the historical context of these stories. I love footnotes. It makes it way more immersive for me when things are more historically accurate, and that was pretty dang cool. You might not care about that, but I loved that aspect of this book. Spear was the first Arthurian fantasy I've read since I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. It's been a long time, but I think it has awakened a craving for more Arthurian fantasy. So if you have any recommendations for anything in that subgenre, leave them in the comments below, because I'm very inexperienced when it comes to this subgenre, but I think it might be one of my things now. Nicola Griffith wrote an amazing book, and I'm definitely going to have to pick up some of her other works later on this year. She's known for writing great books in the historical fantasy subgenre, a subgenre I am very inexperienced with. But if she writes this well in all of her other books, I don't know how I've never heard of her until I picked up this book that the Amazon algorithm gave to me. Because I can't imagine an author writing this well and not being as popular as she deserves to be. So this book is definitely a hidden gem. I think it is well worth your time. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you guys next time.